Namaskar, dear children. Welcome to Rendezvous with Literature by Shobha Arora Chitani. In today's lecture, we are going to study The Enemy by Pearl S. Buck. Now, who was Pearl S. Buck? Her full name was Pearl Sidon Stricker Buck, and she was born in 1892 till 1973. She was an American writer and novelist. She had a Chinese name as she spent her childhood in China, being the daughter of missionaries. She was awarded the Pulitzer Prize in 1932 and the Nobel Prize in Literature in the year 1938. The story Enemy is written in the backdrop of the Second World War. We have to remember the backdrop. I've always insisted on knowing the backdrop, the setting, and the theme of the story so as to be able to contextualize it better and to understand the times in which these conditions prevailed. And how does it influence the readers? How does it influence the characters and the plot? It brings out the sad plight of a prisoner of war from America who makes the reader think about the brutality of war. The story also deals with the conflict that a doctor faces because of sheltering an enemy. So children, this was about the author. Let us understand what we see in the chapter with these slides. Now let us look at the introductory slide. It says that the story highlights how a Japanese doctor saves the life of an American prisoner of war. You're already aware how the story begins. You're already aware how this Japanese doctor Sadao that we're talking about, the protagonist of the lesson, saves the life of an American prisoner of war whose name is Tom, and how he rises above narrow prejudices. He risks his honor. He's not worried about the fact that he's going to be defamed or he's going to be maligned or slandered because he's helping out an enemy prisoner of war. Rather, he is keeping it at stake and he's sheltering a war prisoner of the enemy camp and saving his life, keeping his professional duty and his humanitarian heart before everything else. So the author has beautifully portrayed the conflict in the doctor's mind as a private individual and as a citizen with a sense of national loyalty. Now, if we focus at the setting of this particular chapter, we see that the story takes place on a coastal town of Japan in the year 1941, when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. A war going on between America and Japan. Japanese were hostile to the Americans and ready to kill any American found on their soil. So the animosity was so brave, it was so intense and severe. The atrocities being unleashed at both the nations was such that you could not even imagine to help anyone from the enemy nation. But at the same time, we see this person coming up, although it is considered to be a piece of fiction, but these things actually exist in reality. These are a reminder to us that these narrow prejudices remain only in the mental plane. They remain only in the mental plane. Why? Because geographical boundaries only exist in the mind. We do not see them. These bifurcations, these divisions, these political divisions are purely political. But if you're talking about something in reality, people remain the same. People will never harbor any such insidious thoughts in their heart, right? So what do we see? We see how this Japanese doctor comes forward, forgetting about everything else and bringing out the best in him, and also setting up an example of humanity excelling everything else. Let's pay attention at the theme of this particular chapter. The enemy gives the message that humanity transcends all man-made prejudices and barriers. This is very much true. Does it not transcend all man-made prejudices and barriers? He's not worried about anything else. He is an established doctor. More so, he is also a renowned scientist, somebody who has been able to discover an antidote to clearing or cleansing wounds altogether. And putting your honor and your pride and everything that you've earned over the period of time with such arduous efforts at stake is something worthwhile. And he's not worried about that. That clearly indicates that the humanity, his still conscience awakened from inside. So Dr. Sadao upholds the ethics of medical profession in treating an enemy. The story is a great example of peace, love, sympathy, fellow feeling, and humanity. Children, let's wonder, let's understand and ponder over the theme and the title of this particular chapter, The Enemy. Who do we call our enemy? Who do we consider our enemy? Do you think it is any person who doesn't agree with our perception? Or is it somebody who is harboring any insidious or malign qualities or intentions in their heart for us? Somebody who does not, who is always feeling and expressing emotions which are very very negative towards us. Are we talking about those kind of people and those kind of individuals around us? Are they our enemies, or the people who have been labeled as our enemies because of the political disturbances that we see in our countries? I mean, who is our enemy is what you have to understand, and how do you define somebody as your enemy or as your friend is what you have to think about when you're reading this chapter. But once you're done with the reading of the chapter, you yourself will be confused as to whether you should have called somebody your enemy at one point of time or not. Or was it the conditioning or the kind of upbringing that you had received or the kind of notions that had been embedded in your mind regarding that particular person because you've read or heard, you've seen those people, uh, telling you about them. And that is why you formed an impression about him as that. So think. Now let's take a look at the characters that we see in this chapter. Dr. Sadao Hoki is a Japanese doctor trained by Americans. Sadao's father, who is much concerned about his son's education. He is a true patriot. You are already aware of the fact that he was never a father who would love to play and spend time with his son. He was always somebody who would want him to remain focused with respect to his education. And that is why at the age of 22, he sent Sadao to America to learn everything that could be learned about medicine and science. And this effort that had gone into making this particular person a professional turned out to be very sweet, because we see that he not only turns into a doctor, a very adept doctor, but also a very established scientist, because he is able to he is able to discover an antidote to cleansing wounds entirely clean. And this is why he is held back by the general, and for his treatment he trusts him more than anyone else in the world. So he is able to amass a lot of glory for himself as well as for his people. Who is Anna? She is the wife of Dr. Sadao. They meet in America and they become friends and they get married in Japan. Who is Tom? An American prisoner of war, a soldier of US Navy. The old general is a sick Japanese army general who needed an operation and he trusted only Dr. Sadao. So his allegiance pays off. Officer, a messenger of the general. Gardener, an old gardener in the house of Dr. Sadao. He has been service to this man for innumerable years, because he had been working with them ever since Sadao was a small kid. Yumi is Hannah's maid servant. She takes care of the kids. The cook is an old cook in the house, and if you talk about the place, then the place or the place that you see in the story is the house of Dr. Sadao, which is built on a narrow beach near the sea. Now let us take a look at the notes of the chapter, a few points that you can keep in mind while you are revising the chapter, while you're recapitulating the chapter. Dr. Sadao is a Japanese with professional education from America. Sadao's childhood was spent in Japan. His father is a quiet man and a true Japanese who considers islands to be the stepping stones for Japan's future. Sadao's education was his chief concern, for which he had sent him to America to study surgery and medicine. So this is it about the first part of the chapter. You may call it the introductory part of the chapter. Now, where does Sadao's expertise lie? He was an expert surgeon and a scientist. He had earned great fame in his profession. He was doing research on a discovery to render wounds clean, and he was quite successful with it. Thus, he was not sent with the troops during the war. Also, the general too was unwell and could need his services at any point of time. But then, children, if we ponder at the people, if you pay attention at the characteristics of these people, Dr. Sadao seems to be very, very humanistic. He's a very amiable person at heart, but at the same time, if you compare, if you contrast his personality with that of the general, he seems to be very so very, very self-centered and full of greed for himself. Why? Because he does not allow Dr. Sadao to be sent along with the troops. This is one example that you can clearly keep in mind to know how shallow this personality was and how superficial his life was. He was only concerned about himself, keeping him from, he averted his trip to with the troops so that he could not help them, so that he could be with him and he could operate upon him. It is understandable that he was unwell, that he needed medical support, but then keeping a doctor like Sudao with him in service of him and forgetting about everything else is nothing but sheer dereliction of duty and a focus on just the self. Now, Sadao was in America and his meeting with Hannah. What do we see when he was in America? That he had taken up his professional education in America, where he had a chance meeting with Hannah, who was to become his wife. Now, he falls in love with Hannah. We can very well understand that it was not a blindfolded love that he bears for Hannah. He always ensures that the love had to be pure, and by purity, we are not talking about any sort of chastity here. We're not talking about any sort of, virginity test over here, but we are talking about something that his conditioning reflected, and that is purity of race. So, what do we mean by that? That he always wanted to ensure that the girl he fell in love with was a Japanese, so that he does not flout the traditions and the norms that have been laid down by the father. He does not want to go against the father's upbringing. And the father always believed that somebody who is outside the realms of being a Japanese is an impure blood. So he had lived in Professor Harley's house, where he had nearly decided to go not to go because of bad food, dirty lodgings, and an extremely talkative wife of the professor. Sadao had made sure that Hannah was a Japanese, and then they had waited to return to Japan to get married according to the traditions of their land. Remember, they did not marry heedlessly in America. And why did they not do it? Because obviously they wanted to consent, they wanted to take a formal consent from their parents, giving them due respect and not, taking such liberal and radical decisions by staying there and doing whatever they wanted to. So they were always within the precincts of the house, always following whatever had to be, customarily followed by the house people. So very culturally restricted, I would say. And then they had two children and a successful career. American prisoner of war. Now it is at this point of time that we see the American prisoner of war entering into the picture. It is this time when he is enjoying a utopiac moment with his wife Hannah. They are blissfully married to each other, and they are pondering over the fact that how they bumped into each other and how beautifully they fell in love with each other. Now, American prisoner of war enters into the picture at this point of time. He has been washed ashore on the coast near Sadao's house. He is badly wounded, he is bleeding, and he had been cut by the rocks. The description is very, very real, and it is very ripping for the heart. He was an enemy soldier on the run and had been shot at while escaping. Hannah and Sadao wanted to throw him back into the sea, but neither could do so. Obviously, they were confused. They were completely perplexed as to whether they should let him enter their house and should treat him medically, or should let him be the way he is. Sadao and Hannah are in dilemma. If they shelter the POW, who is a POW? Prisoner of war, they will be considered as traitors. Obviously, it's like if you're sheltering an enemy soldier, then you are going against the rules of your own country. You're deceiving your own people. But if they hand him over to the police, they were sure that the man would die. So they could not throw him into the sea because obviously the predicament that they were already facing. They fear the servants that might report the matter. Now, they also had to worry about the things and the circumstances, the people around them, the ambience, and everyone else who was with them in the house. So, the servants might just go and blurt out the secret. Then, who's going to bell the cat? The servants were frightened and opposed their master's gesture of helping the prisoner of war. The old gardener feared that the sea would take revenge from his master. Yumi, the maidservant, was worried about the children. So they expressed their own opinions. They were apprehensive about keeping this man, and they were very, very rigid in their notion about the enemy. So you can say that the values that they had in their mind were deeply entrenched with prejudice and hatred towards this man, so much so that they never wanted him to survive. They even went on to say that if nature doesn't want him to survive, then why are you helping them, helping him out, come out of this situation? Now, what is the lesson that is learned by Sadao in America? The professor of anatomy, now why this happens when he is operating the wounded man, when he is already, hitting the bullet or he is pulling out the bullet. So he is reminded of the lessons that he had taken while he was in America. Now, what was the lesson that this professor had taught him? He had taught him the professor of anatomy had taught his students that the ignorance of human body by a surgeon is a cardinal sin. Obviously, you are operating on somebody, and if you're not doing it the right way, or if you're not doing justice to what you are there for, then you are committing a murder. So it's a principal sin if you are not thorough with your own professional skills, or you are not thorough with your expertise. So you should not even be getting into this particular thing. So operating without full knowledge of human anatomy is no less than a murder. So this Sadao had imbibed and was perfect in surgeries. So he is very sure about the fact that he does not have to play with anyone's life. And that is why he had sharpened his skills, he has chiseled his, you can say, skills in such a manner that he was a perfectionist in surgeries. And that is why he could easily be banked upon. Sadao performed surgery on the prisoner of war, and he was successful in taking out the lodged bullet. Gradually, the American naval man started recovering. Now, what are the problems that aggravate for Sadao and Hannah? It's not the end of the story that he has pulled out the bullet and he has, the prisoner of war is out of danger and then the story ends here. No, the problems aggravate. They kept on getting worse, worse for these two people, for the couple. And what is it? That the servants not able to take in anymore, they deserted their masters. So they left their masters. This was their way of taking revenge. This was their, you can say, in various way of taking revenge from their masters, that they are not going to work any longer for them if he is going to let the prisoner of war stay inside the house. Now, in the meantime, Sadao types a letter to the chief of police stating the truth but leaves it halfway in the drawer. What is he doing? Remember, there is a scene in which he is trying to write a letter, confessing everything honestly, but then at the same time, there is something that stops him from within. And he halts the process. He does not go further. So he does not write anything else. He's called by the general as the latter is in pain, of course, but then there is this fear in the heart of Sadao and Hannah that why is the messenger from the general coming to him? What is the reason? The reason we later get to realize that it is actually because he is in pain or that he needs him to be there around his surgery time that he has been sent for. It is not because his secret of keeping this man at his house is out. It's not because of that. So the doctor confides in him, who in turn offers to send his assassins to kill the prisoner of war and to remove his body without Hannah knowing anything. So obviously there is this turbulence going on, this mental turmoil which is still going on, and Sadao wants to get rid of it. Obviously, he is somebody very straightforward and honest with his profession as well as with his nation. There is no doubt about it. So he wanted to spill out, he wanted to spill the beans, and he wanted to let the general know about it clearly, so that if anything happens, at least he should be on the safer side. But the general is general. He's totally selfish and completely blindfolded towards his duties, and he promises, superficially pays attention to the details that have been shared by Sadao without sharing, without giving any sense of, you can say, surprise. There is no sense of surprise on his face. Rather, he is ill bothered about this little incident. He does not even consider the prisoner of war as a, as a fatal threat for his own country. Rather, he says that it's okay. I'll do one thing, I'll help you out, I'll send my assassins to you, and they will do this work in such a way. These private assassins are going to do this job of killing this man in such a manner that you will not even get to know about it, and Hannah will also not get to know about it. Now let's see what happens next. General's promise is forgotten because he's so self-absorbed that he does not even remember that he had to fulfill a promise. And Sadao realizes there is this, the conscience is already awakened, but then it is also telling him to think before handing the prisoner of war to these authorities, because they could be really detrimental for him. So the general forgot about his promise, leaving the doctor felt restless night after night, till finally he decided to help the prisoner escape. So finally he decides that he is going to let the prisoner escape from here. Now what are the arrangements that he makes for Tom's safe escape? Tom was told to row to a little island close by from where if he was lucky, he could escape on a Korean boat. Sadao gave him a flashlight, that is a torch, to flash it once only and when told to do so. So it's like he ensures that there is no danger for this man. He wants him to sail smoothly, and he tells him everything. He also provides him with food, water, kimono, and a black cloth to cover his head. But at the same time, there is this turmoil going on within him. There is this tempestuous feeling that he gets to experience inside his heart, that why was he not able to kill this man, or why was he not able to hand him over to the general or to the authorities when he could have easily done that? Why did he offer to help him? Why did he let his, personal self rule over the duty that he would have filled towards his nation? So he recalls the time spent in America towards the end, the people he met, the teacher who taught him, Miss Harley, who was kind to him, the Americans with all their prejudices. He wondered why he could not kill Tom, the American prisoner of war. But then there is always this note, there is always this understanding that we cannot be brutal, no matter how rigid our conditioning is, how prejudiced our mind is, but we can never ever let the inner self be ruled by these narrow prejudices that prevail in the world outside. So, with this amazement, he wraps up the chapter. Now, let us see how this chapter's title is justified. The Enemy is an apt title for the story that has Second World War as the background that eventually culminates in dropping of atom bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki by America. Under these circumstances, an American prisoner of war, sailor by no chance, could be treated as a friend by the Japanese. So you could not expect such a person to be treated as a friend given the circumstances, given the kind of attacks that Japan was already facing at the cruel hands of America. The servants in Dr. Sadao's house vehemently protest against his presence and treat him as their sworn enemy, so much so that they sever all their long-standing relationship with Sadao. Now the Sadao couple too considers Tom to be their enemy, but being educated, they have a broader and more generous view of life, and in spite of reservations, mental conflicts, and various other odds they are confronted with, they take a humanistic view. The doctor's professional ethics also urge him to treat the prisoner sailor as a patient. Neither Dr. Sadao nor Hannah at any stage consider him to be their friend, in spite of the fact that they have spent a number of years in the States. Hence, The Enemy is a befitting title for the story. Children, you can take a look at some of the short answer type questions with sample answers for your reference. You can take a screenshot of these questions in case you want to file them somewhere or you want to take a look at them later. Do take reference from the kind of questions that I'm giving you and the sample answers. They are going to help you out a great deal in forming your own opinion, and you will clearly know what all to write, what all not to write. This is the next set of questions. When and where did Sadao marry Hannah? How was their married life? Both of them saw something black come out of the mist. What did they see and how did they react to it? And these are the sample answers. What was the attitude of Sadao and Hannah towards the white man? And what solution did Hannah offer to resolve Sadao's predicament? Thank you so much, students. I feel the chapter has been able to get comprehended very well, and I feel I've been able to do justice to its explanation. Hope you like, subscribe and share my video. Thank you so much.